After doing that first show in September 2006, this thing took on a life of its own. Really. Uh, People were sending me messages to my website. I was mostly getting a mix of emails, some opposed, but mostly those in favor of what I was doing. And yeah, for 10 months, uh, I was booked solid with guests. I had people writing to me, families writing to me, thanking me for having this show, that they had not, that they wouldn't have even thought about this, and thought that they were getting ripped off if they hadn't heard that original show and subsequent shows. Um, and at that point in my life, I really felt like I was making a difference in the world. So for 10 months, this goes on, and then the owner of the radio station I was with, he and I had reached an impasse. We couldn't come to terms. It was contract renegotiation time, and I just in this. I mean, in 1 week between one show and the next, I had informed him that this next one was going to be my last. And so what I did a few days before what would be my last show was that I got on one of the anti-Scientology chat boards, and I had sent a message, major announcement on the Church of Scientology coming this weekend. Now, I mean, I didn't stop to think about how I had worded that, because anybody who read it thought that I had some inside information on what was going on with the local church in Los Angeles. And in fact, I didn't. So, that very night, these two ex-Scientologists, which happened to also be ex-LAPD cops, show up. I mean, we're talking within a couple of hours of my post. They show up at one of my relatives' houses, and they, they knew, of course, from my background that because I've talked about it as well on the show, that I was a victim of childhood sexual abuse by a priest when I was young. But they had made it sound like, in fact, I wasn't a victim. They didn't say victim. They didn't say perpetrator. They just said he's been involved in childhood sexual abuse. And of course, when you say it that way, which they intended to do that way, it cast a very dangerous light on me. And so those relatives ended up calling my parents about it, almost as if to say, keep him away from our granddaughter, whatever. And they, my dad had to explain to them, no, you misunderstand. And my dad calls me at work and wants to know who these guys were. And I didn't even register it at first until I got a hold of somebody that I knew. And they said, oh, boy. And, that's when I found out they were actually are members of Scientology. They're ex-LAPD cops. So I had to get a lawyer that night that somebody had recommended for me. And, within the next morning, I'm signing this billion-year contract, billion years, stipulating that I would no longer talk about Scientology on the air. And so the show comes that weekend, and everybody thinks, it's now out that I had signed that contract. So people are misconstruing facts. They're thinking that the reason I'm leaving the radio station is because I was chased off by Scientology. No, I wasn't happy with the business arrangement at the station, but everybody thought that I got scared off, and that such was not the case. So I was off the air for quite a while, probably, almost a year, about a year and a half. In the meantime, Andrew Morton, the author of Tom Cruise, the unauthorized biography, was getting ready to finish the book, and he called and he interviewed me about that whole episode of those investigators, because they didn't just come to my relatives' home, they came to my parents' house too. And they threatened. They said I was going to be sued, this and that. So yeah, Andrew Morton wrote about this, and several months later, it was released on the bookshelves. People saw my name in print. And I had become, even after my being off the radio, my name was still out there and synonymous with speaking out for, victims of this abuse. So in any case, I look back over all these years, and I ended up coming back to that station and not talking and abiding by that contract. But in retrospect, I mean, I've been off that station now for 6 years. I'm on a new one, KMET, in Banning, Beaumont, Hemet area. And we're an ABC station. And, after all these years, I'm thinking about it, and it's, wait a minute, a billion-year contract. That is so ridiculous on its face. If you or I were in a contract situation, you would look at the contract, they would specify, and you'd have to specify that starting July 20th of 2018, up until 10 years later, July 20th, 2028, they'd have to specify that. How do you add a billion years? How do you do that in a calculator? You can't. And the more I think about it, I'm thinking, this is so ridiculous. They don't even have that in the contract. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not legal and binding. And all they've done for years, and all this was meant to do, was scare me into silence. And I've come to a point with it where, wait a minute, that contract also said going forward, I would not do any new shows on Scientology. It said nothing about going backwards, and that's why I'm playing the reruns. They didn't say I couldn't.